The galaxy was a vast, endless ocean of stars, planets, and cosmic empires that had ruled for millennia. From the outside, it seemed like these empires would last forever, standing tall with their unmatched technology, powerful fleets, and ancient traditions. But deep within the core of the human spirit was something none of the galactic rulers had expected: a steel soul and a starborn heart that refused to bend, no matter how vast the cosmos became. Humanity had always been the underdog in the galaxy's grand stage. When they first left Earth, they were small, weak, and barely capable of interstellar travel. They were surrounded by empires that had existed long before humanity even knew the stars were there. These empires looked down on humans, seeing them as fragile beings, primitive in both their minds and technology. But humanity had one thing that no other race in the galaxy had: an unbreakable will. As humanity spread across the stars, they did not conquer with overwhelming fleets or grand technologies. Instead, they adapted, learned, and grew stronger with each encounter. They became known as the survivors of the galaxy, the ones who could turn even the bleakest situations into victories. For every defeat, they came back stronger, more determined. And it wasn't long before the galactic empires started to notice. The first of these cosmic kingdoms to fall was the Zelrith Dominion. The Zelrith were an old and powerful species, known for their psychic abilities and their mastery of energy manipulation. They had ruled over dozens of star systems for thousands of years, controlling the very elements of the cosmos with their minds. Their ships glided through space, seemingly untouchable, and their soldiers were feared across the galaxy. But then humanity arrived on Zelrith's doorstep. It wasn't a direct invasion that brought down the Zelrith. No, humanity wasn't ready for such a large-scale conflict. Instead, they used their ingenuity and their tenacity to undermine the Empire from within. Human operatives infiltrated Zelrith society, learning their secrets, their weaknesses. And then, with a single well-placed strike, they disrupted the energy network that powered the entire Zelrith civilization. One moment, the Zelrith were the undisputed rulers of their region of space. The next, their cities were plunged into darkness, their ships lost power, and their psychic soldiers found themselves cut off from the very energy they had relied on for centuries. The fall of the Zelrith was swift and brutal, and humanity had been the catalyst for their downfall. Word of the Zelrith's defeat spread quickly through the galaxy. The other cosmic kingdoms began to take notice of humanity, seeing them no longer as a minor annoyance, but as a legitimate threat. They watched as humanity continued to grow, expanding their influence across the stars. But even as the galactic empires plotted against humanity, the humans were always one step ahead. They didn't seek out open conflict. Instead, they used their adaptability, their resilience, and their steel-hard resolve to outmaneuver their enemies. And with every empire that fell, humanity's star rose higher. Now, decades after the fall of the Zelrith, humanity stood on the brink of something much larger than they had ever imagined. The galaxy was changing, and at the heart of that change was the human race. Captain Elena Markov stood on the bridge of the Argonaut, the flagship of humanity's newest fleet. Her eyes were fixed on the starry void outside the massive viewing window, where the vastness of space stretched out endlessly before her. Behind her, the crew of the ship moved with quiet efficiency, their faces lit by the glow of the control panels and holographic displays. "Status report," she said, her voice calm but firm. "All systems are green, Captain," said Lieutenant Rios, her second in command. "We're on course for the Tyros system. ETA, 2 hours." Elena nodded, her gaze still fixed on the stars. The Tyros system was the heart of the Etherian Empire, one of the last remaining cosmic kingdoms that had yet to fall to humanity's advance. The Etherians were a powerful race, known for their mastery of gravitational manipulation and their near-immortal lifespans. Their empire had stood for over 10,000 years, untouched by war or conflict. But now, humanity was coming for them. "We've been waiting a long time for this," Elena said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "The Etherians have had their way for far too long. Lieutenant Rios stepped up beside her, his expression serious. "Do you really think we can take them down, Captain? The Etherians are... well, they're not like the others." Elena turned to face him, her eyes hard. "We've taken down empires older and more powerful than the Etherians, Rios. And we'll take them down too. The key isn't their technology or their power. It's their arrogance. They think they're untouchable, just like all the others did. That's their weakness. And we'll exploit it." Rios nodded, though there was still doubt in his eyes. The Etherians were indeed different. Their technology was beyond anything humanity had ever encountered, and their control over gravitational fields made them nearly impossible to fight in conventional space combat. But if anyone could find a way to defeat them, it was Captain Elena Markov. "We'll be ready," Rios said finally, turning back to the command console. As the Argonaut and its fleet approached the Tyros system, the tension on the bridge grew. The Etherians had never been challenged in their own territory, and no one knew exactly what to expect. But Elena was confident. She had studied the Etherians for years, learning their strengths, their weaknesses, and most importantly, their blind spots. "Bring up the tactical map," Elena ordered. A holographic map of the Tyros system appeared in front of her, showing the positions of the Etherian defenses, their space stations, and their capital planet, Tyros Prime. It was a heavily fortified system, with layers of gravitational fields protecting it from any potential invaders. But Elena had a plan. "We'll use the asteroid field as cover," she said, pointing to a dense cluster of asteroids near the outer edge of the system. "Their sensors won't be able to detect us through the gravitational interference. Once we're close enough, we'll deploy the quantum disruptors." Rios frowned. "Quantum disruptors? But we've never used those in an actual battle before. What if they don't work?" "They'll work," Elena said confidently. "The disruptors will destabilize the gravitational fields protecting Tyros Prime. Once those fields are down, we can move in and hit them where it hurts." The plan was risky, but it was the only way to break through the Etherians' defenses. The quantum disruptors were a new technology, developed specifically to counter the Etherians' control over gravity. If they worked, they would neutralize the Etherians' greatest advantage. If they didn't, well, humanity's fleet wouldn't stand a chance. As the fleet entered the asteroid field, the tension on the bridge was palpable. The ship's sensors were on high alert, scanning for any sign of Etherian patrols. But so far, there was nothing. It seemed the Etherians were unaware of the human fleet's approach. "Disruptors are ready," Rios reported. "On your command, Captain." Elena took a deep breath. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. If the disruptors worked, they would strike a crippling blow to the Etherian Empire. If they failed, they would be at the mercy of one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. "Fire the disruptors," Elena ordered. The Argonaut shuddered as the disruptors activated, sending out a pulse of quantum energy toward the gravitational fields surrounding Tyros Prime. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the energy readings on the tactical map began to shift. The gravitational fields around the planet flickered, destabilizing as the disruptors did their work. "It's working," Rios exclaimed, his eyes wide with surprise. "The fields are collapsing." Elena allowed herself a small smile. "Good. Now let's show the Etherians what humanity is capable of." As the gravitational fields fell, the human fleet surged forward, moving through the asteroid field and into the heart of the Tyros system. Alarms began to blare across the Etherian defenses as they realized what was happening. But it was too late. The human ships were already inside the system, their weapons charged and ready. "All ships, engage at will," Elena ordered. The battle for Tyros Prime had begun. The fleet burst into the heart of the Tyros system like a spear, cutting through the vacuum of space with a precision that only humanity's steel resolve could muster. The Etherians had always prided themselves on their mastery of gravitational manipulation, believing their defenses were impenetrable. Yet, the sight of their mighty shields flickering and crumbling like sandcastles before an incoming tide was nothing short of a revelation. They had underestimated humanity, as so many had done before. Captain Elena Markov stood steady on the bridge of the Argonaut, her sharp eyes glued to the tactical display. Outside, beyond the protective glass of the viewing window, the stars were alive with the flash of laser fire and the silent explosions of dying ships. The Etherian fleet, caught off guard by the sudden collapse of their gravitational defenses, scrambled to form a coherent line of defense, but they were too slow. Humanity had always excelled in the chaos of battle, and now they had momentum on their side. Direct all firepower to their primary defense station, Elena ordered, her voice as calm as if she were giving a routine status report. We need to cripple their coordination before they regroup. Lieutenant Rios nodded and relayed the command. Moments later, the Argonauts' heavy cannons fired in unison, their beams slicing through space and slamming into the massive Etherian station that orbited Tyros Prime. The station, a beautiful construct of shimmering metal and glowing energy fields, buckled under the assault. Sections of it began to explode, sending debris and twisted metal spinning into the void. Captain, the Etherians are deploying their fleet from the planet's surface, Rios reported, his tone now far more urgent. It's going to be a heavy push. Elena glanced at the incoming blips on the tactical screen. The Etherian fleet was massive, easily outnumbering the human ships by a significant margin. But numbers had never been the deciding factor in humanity's rise. They had faced overwhelming odds before. This was just another day in the office. Ready the next wave of disruptors, Elena commanded, her mind racing with calculations. We'll use the planetary atmosphere against them. The disruptors, still a relatively untested piece of technology, had already performed beyond expectations in bringing down the Etherian shields. Now, Elena planned to use them in a different way. By detonating them in the planet's upper atmosphere, she hoped to create a cascading effect that would disrupt the gravity fields of any ships launching from the surface, sending them into chaotic spirals before they could even leave the atmosphere. Captain, Rios said hesitantly, if we detonate disruptors in the atmosphere, it could destabilize the planet's gravitational core. Elena's jaw tightened. It was a risk. She knew that. But if the Etherians were allowed to fully deploy their forces, the human fleet would be overwhelmed in minutes. We'll deal with the consequences later, she said firmly. Do it. Rios nodded, though there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He knew as well as she did that this could have catastrophic effects on the planet itself. But war was never without risk, and humanity had long since abandoned the luxury of playing it safe. As the disruptors were launched toward Tyros Prime's atmosphere, Elena allowed herself a brief moment to reflect. She thought of the other worlds they had encountered, the other empires they had brought to their knees. Zelrith, Farani, Shiver, all once proud, now reduced to echoes of their former glory. Each had thought they were invincible, and each had been wrong. The Etherians would soon join them. Disruptors ready, Rios reported. Detonate, Elena ordered. The bridge of the Argonaut shuddered slightly as the disruptors detonated in Tyros Prime's upper atmosphere. The result was immediate and devastating. The Etherian ships attempting to launch from the planet's surface were caught in a storm of gravitational distortions, their engines sputtering and failing as the very fabric of space around them twisted and buckled. Some ships were torn apart mid-launch, while others were sent careening back toward the surface in uncontrolled spirals, crashing into the planet with fiery explosions. Direct hit, Rios said, his voice tinged with awe. Their fleet is in disarray. Elena allowed herself a grim smile. Now, we finish this. The Argonaut and the rest of the human fleet pressed the attack, focusing their fire on the remaining Etherian ships still in orbit. Without their full fleet to support them, the Etherian defenders were being overwhelmed. One by one, their ships were destroyed or disabled, leaving the path to Tyros Prime clear. Prepare the landing craft, Elena ordered. We're taking the fight to the surface. The capital city of Tyros Prime was a masterpiece of Etherian architecture. Towering spires of gleaming metal reached toward the sky, connected by bridges that shimmered with energy fields. The streets were lined with statues of Etherian leaders, each one a monument to their empire's millennia of dominance. But now, those same streets were filled with panic. As the human landing craft descended from the sky, The once serene and controlled Etherean society was thrown into chaos. The gravitational disruptions caused by the disruptors had wreaked havoc on the planet's infrastructure, causing buildings to collapse and power grids to fail. And now, with humanity's soldiers pouring into the city, the Etherean populace was beginning to realize just how fragile their empire truly was. Captain Elena Markov stepped off the ramp of her landing craft, her boots hitting the cracked pavement of the capital city's main square. Around her, human soldiers fanned out, securing the area and neutralizing any remaining Etherean forces. The air was thick with smoke, and the distant sound of explosions echoed through the city. Captain, Rios said, approaching her with a datapad. We've located the Etherean High Council. They've barricaded themselves in the central tower. Elena glanced at the towering structure in the distance. It was the tallest building in the city, its metallic surface gleaming even through the smoke and destruction. The High Council, the ruling body of the Etherean Empire, had likely thought they would be safe there, protected by their empire's finest soldiers. But humanity had come too far, fought too hard, to let a few old rulers stand in their way. Send a team to breach the tower, Elena ordered. We're ending this today. Rios nodded and relayed the command. Within minutes, a squad of human soldiers was making their way toward the tower, moving with the precision and discipline that had become humanity's trademark. Elena watched them go, her mind already turning to the next step. Taking the capital was only the beginning. To truly destroy the Etherean Empire, they would need to take control of their technological archives, their research facilities, and, most importantly, their network of gravity wells that spanned the entire system. Captain, you should see this, Rios said suddenly, his voice tense. Elena turned to look at the datapad in his hands. The screen showed a live feed from one of the recon drones circling the city. It was focused on a section of the capital that had been largely untouched by the fighting. A garden of sorts, filled with strange, glowing plants and statues of long-forgotten Etherean gods. But that wasn't what caught Elena's attention. In the center of the garden, partially obscured by the statues and vegetation, was a structure unlike anything she had ever seen. It was a massive sphere, shimmering with a soft blue light and covered in intricate symbols that seemed to pulse with energy. "What is that?" Elena asked, frowning. "We're not sure," Rios replied. "The energy readings are off the charts, though. Whatever it is, it's powerful." Elena stared at the image on the screen, her mind racing. The Ethereans had been known for their technological advancements, especially when it came to manipulating gravity. Could this structure be the source of their power? Was this the key to their control over the Tyros system? "We need to secure that structure," Elena said, her voice firm. "Send a team immediately. If that's the source of their power, we can't let it fall into the wrong hands." Rios hesitated. "Captain, if that thing is as powerful as the readings suggest, it could be dangerous to even get near it." Elena turned to him, her eyes cold and determined. "We didn't come all this way to play it safe, Lieutenant. We take it, we figure out what it is, and if it's dangerous, we make sure it's no longer a threat." Rios nodded, though the doubt still lingered in his eyes. "Understood. I'll send a team right away." As the orders were given and the soldiers prepared to move out, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something much bigger than just the fall of the Etherean Empire. The structure in the garden, whatever it was, held the answers to questions she hadn't even thought to ask yet. But one thing was certain. If humanity was going to survive in a galaxy filled with ancient and powerful forces, they needed to understand those forces, and, if necessary, learn to control them. "Captain," Rios said quietly, "do you really think we can take down the entire Etherean Empire?" Elena looked at him, her expression hard as steel. "We've taken down everything that's come before them, Lieutenant, and we'll take down everything that comes after." She turned her gaze back to the city, where the battle was still raging, and the towering spire of the High Council loomed in the distance. This is just the beginning. The towering spires of Tyros Prime were no longer gleaming symbols of eternal power. Smoke billowed from the damaged buildings, and the streets that once hosted proud Etherean processions were now filled with the sounds of conflict, shouts of retreating soldiers, the blasts of energy weapons, and the sharp crackle of human artillery. What had been an unbreakable fortress of cosmic power was now on the verge of collapse, and humanity was at its doorstep, hammering relentlessly on the gates. Captain Elena Markov stood at the heart of it all, her eyes narrowing as she watched her soldiers advance. The Etherian capital, Tyros City, had been built to withstand anything the galaxy could throw at it. But no one had ever accounted for humanity's steel-hearted persistence. What they lacked in sheer numbers, they more than made up for in their unwillingness to give up, ever. And now, with the Etherian High Council cowering in their central tower, Elena knew the final blow was coming. "Captain, our team is approaching the sphere structure," Lieutenant Rio said, his face tense as he examined the live drone feed. The strange, shimmering object in the center of the garden still pulsed with a faint blue glow. "Energy readings are spiking. We don't know what it's capable of." Elena's gaze flicked to the screen, her jaw tightening. She knew instinctively that this object, this artifact, was the key to the Etherians' hold on the Tyros system, perhaps even their entire empire. But what disturbed her wasn't the technology itself. It was the fact that they had found no record of it in any of their intelligence on the Etherians. No reports, no stolen documents, nothing. It was as if the Etherians had kept it hidden from the galaxy, and perhaps even from themselves. "We need to secure it before the Etherians can use it against us," Elena said, her voice firm. "We can't afford to take any chances." Rios glanced up at her, the unease in his expression clear. "And if it's too dangerous to handle," Elena didn't hesitate. "Then we destroy it. Whatever it is, we can't let it remain in enemy hands." The team of human soldiers moved through the smoke-filled streets, their weapons at the ready, as they neared the structure. Sergeant Juno K led the squad, her sharp eyes scanning every corner for signs of Etherian resistance. The battle had spread through the entire city, but near the garden, things were strangely quiet. Too quiet. "Stay sharp," Juno whispered through her comms. "This is the kind of silence that makes you dead if you aren't careful." Her squad nodded silently, their focus unbroken. The garden was a sprawling complex, filled with ancient statues and towering alien trees whose roots seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. And at the center of it all was the sphere, hovering just above the ground, its surface etched with symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Command, we're in position," Juno said, keeping her voice low. "No sign of Etherian forces, but the energy levels are going off the charts. Advise." Elena's voice crackled through the comms. "Proceed with extreme caution. Any signs of activation, pull back immediately." Juno moved closer to the sphere, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up as the air around her seemed to hum with energy. There was something deeply unnatural about this thing. The Etherians were known for their mastery of gravitational fields and spatial manipulation, but this felt different. It wasn't just advanced, it felt ancient. "Sergeant, you need to see this," one of the soldiers said, pointing to the base of the sphere. Juno crouched down, her breath catching in her throat as she saw what the soldier was referring to. It was a control panel of sorts, but it wasn't Etherian in design. The symbols etched into the panel were completely foreign, nothing that any of their linguistic experts had seen before. This wasn't Etherian technology. This was something else entirely. "Command, we've got a problem," Juno said, her voice tight with urgency. "This isn't Etherian tech. I don't know what this is, but it's not from here." There was a long silence on the other end of the comms before Elena's voice came through. "Understood. Continue with caution. We need to know what we're dealing with." Juno's hands hovered over the control panel, her mind racing. She had no idea what would happen if she activated it, but they had come too far to turn back now. Taking a deep breath, she pressed her hand to one of the glowing symbols. For a moment, nothing happened. The sphere remained still, its faint blue glow pulsing steadily. Then, with a low hum, the ground beneath the sphere began to shake. The symbols on the sphere's surface lit up, one by one, until the entire object was bathed in an eerie blue light. The hum grew louder, and the air around them began to distort, as if reality itself was bending and warping under the sphere's influence. "Pull back, now." Juno ordered, her heart pounding in her chest. But before the squad could retreat, a burst of energy erupted from the sphere, knocking them off their feet and sending shockwaves through the surrounding area. Juno hit the ground hard, her vision blurring as the world seemed to spin around her. She struggled to regain her bearings, her ears ringing from the blast. Through the haze, she could see the sphere had stopped glowing, but something else had changed. The statues that surrounded the garden, the ancient monuments that had stood silently for centuries, were moving. "Sergeant, look!" one of the soldiers shouted, scrambling to his feet as the statues began to shift and creak, their stone forms cracking and breaking apart to reveal shimmering metal underneath. They're not statues," Juno breathed, horror dawning on her face. "They're machines, the ancient machines, once thought to be nothing more than decorative relics, came to life, their eyes glowing with the same blue light as the sphere. One by one, they turned their attention to the human squad, their movements deliberate and menacing. "Command, we've got hostiles," Juno shouted into her comms. "The statues are some kind of defensive machines. They're activating." Elena's voice came through instantly, her tone sharp and controlled. "Get out of there, now." Juno didn't need to be told twice. "Fall back. Get to the extraction point." The squad retreated, firing at the advancing machines as they scrambled for cover. The machines moved with terrifying speed, their once slow movements now quick and precise. Energy weapons built into their arms lit up the garden, firing beams of blue light at the retreating soldiers. Juno ducked behind a statue, one of the few that hadn't activated, her heart racing as she tried to think of a way out. The machines were relentless, and their firepower was overwhelming. Even worse, the sphere was still pulsing with energy, as if it was feeding power directly into the machines. "We can't hold them off," one of the soldiers shouted as they fired another round of shots at the machines. "We need air support. Command, we need air support at the garden now." Juno barked into her comms. "Negative," Elena's voice replied, frustration evident in her tone. "All air units are engaged with Etherian forces. You're on your own." Juno cursed under her breath. They were trapped. The machines were closing in fast, and without backup, they wouldn't last much longer. Unless... Her eyes darted back to the sphere. It was still glowing, still pulsing with energy. If they could disrupt it, if they could somehow shut it down, it might stop the machines in their tracks. "Cover me," Juno shouted, rising from her cover. The squad hesitated, but only for a moment. They opened fire, laying down suppressing shots as Juno sprinted toward the sphere. Energy blasts flew past her, but she didn't slow down. Her only hope, their only hope, was to stop whatever was powering these machines. She reached the sphere, her hands flying over the control panel as she searched for something, anything, that could shut it down. The symbols were still glowing, and the energy readings were spiking higher than ever. Come on," she muttered under her breath, her fingers moving frantically. Behind her, the sounds of the battle grew louder. The machines were getting closer. And then, just as Juno thought it was too late, her hand brushed against a symbol she hadn't noticed before. It was smaller than the others, tucked away in the corner of the panel. She pressed it, and the sphere suddenly went dark. The machines stopped moving. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The squad held their breath, waiting for the machines to spring back to life. But they didn't. The sphere was completely inactive, and the machines stood frozen where they were, their eyes dark and lifeless. "Command, the sphere is down," Juno said, her voice shaking with relief. "The machines have stopped." Elena's voice came through, calm and steady. "Good work, Sergeant. Secure the area and hold your position. Reinforcements are on their way." Juno sank to her knees, her chest heaving as the adrenaline began to wear off. They had done it. They had stopped the machines. But as she looked at the lifeless sphere, a sinking feeling settled in her gut. Whatever this thing was, it was far more dangerous than they had realized. And she had a feeling this was only the beginning. Back on the Argonaut, Captain Elena Markov watched the live feed from the garden with a grim expression. The sphere had been deactivated, and the machines had been stopped, but the fact that they had activated in the first place was deeply troubling. "Rios," she said, turning to her second-in-command, "I want a full analysis of that sphere. I want to know what it is, where it came from, and how the Etherians got their hands on it." "Yes, Captain," Rios replied, already moving to relay the orders. Elena stared at the screen, her mind racing. The Etherians had always been secretive about their technology, but this was something else. This was a weapon, a tool of unimaginable power. And if the Etherians hadn't created it, that meant someone else had. Someone far older and more dangerous. "We need to move fast," Elena said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "Before whoever built that sphere comes looking for it." The Etherian Empire, once thought unshakable, was now in shambles. Smoke curled up from the capital city of Tyros Prime as the last remnants of the Etherian defenses crumbled under humanity's relentless assault. The battle for the planet had been brutal, but it was almost over. Captain Elena Markov stood at the command deck of the Argonaut, her mind still racing over the events in the garden. The sphere had been deactivated, but its sudden activation, and the machines that had come to life around it, suggested something much deeper, much older than the Etherian Empire itself. "Rios, give me a status update," Elena ordered, her voice tense. "Ground forces have secured the High Council Tower," Lieutenant Rios replied. "We've detained several members of the Etherian leadership, but they're refusing to cooperate. The capital is under our control, and most of the Etherian military has surrendered." But he hesitated, glancing at the live feed from the garden. "That sphere, Captain, it's like nothing we've ever seen. Our scientists are still trying to figure it out, but there's no clear origin. And those machines that activated, they weren't Etherian." Elena's gaze hardened. She had suspected as much. "Send the data to Central Command," she said. "We need every expert we can get working on this. And I want to lock down on any information about that sphere. If there's something bigger going on here, we can't afford to let the galaxy find out until we know what we're dealing with." Rios nodded, already relaying the orders to the communications team. "And what about the High Council, Captain? We can start interrogations, but it's unlikely they'll talk." Elena considered the options. The Etherians were a proud species, and it was unlikely that any of their leaders would willingly divulge their secrets, especially if it meant revealing whatever connection they had to the sphere. But there was something else that had been nagging at her mind. The Etherians had ruled for millennia, and for all their arrogance, they had survived for a reason. They wouldn't have activated the sphere unless they believed it would turn the tide of the war. "Let's give them something to think about," Elena said, her eyes narrowing. "Bring the High Council members to the Central Command Chamber. Let's see if they're willing to talk when they realize how much they've lost." Rios's expression was grim as he nodded. "Understood, Captain." As Rios turned to carry out her orders, Elena returned her gaze to the live feed from the garden. The sphere, now dark and inactive, seemed almost serene in the aftermath of the battle. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of what it truly was. Whatever power it held, whatever ancient technology it represented, was far beyond anything humanity, or even the Etherians, had encountered. She had seen enough of the galaxy to know one thing for certain. When something this old and powerful appeared, it was never alone. There were always greater forces at play, and if this sphere had been activated, it meant that those forces were already stirring. "Captain, we've got movement near the garden," a voice crackled over the comms, interrupting her thoughts. It was one of the ground team commanders, stationed near the sphere. "You might want to take a look at this." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of movement?" "We're not sure," the commander replied, his voice laced with unease. "But the sphere, it's not active again, but there's something happening. The ground around it is shifting, and our instruments are picking up strange energy signatures." Elena frowned, pulling up the feed from the ground team's cameras. The sphere was still there, surrounded by the deactivated machines, but the ground beneath it had begun to crack, thin tendrils of light seeping through the soil. It was as if something was waking up beneath the surface, something buried deep within the planet. "Pull your team back," Elena ordered immediately. fall back to a safe distance and wait for further instructions. Do not engage. The commander acknowledged the order, and Elena watched as the team began to retreat from the garden. But as they moved, the ground beneath them rumbled, and the cracks around the sphere widened. The tendrils of light grew brighter, illuminating the area with an eerie, unnatural glow. "Captain," Rios said quietly, his voice filled with concern, "this doesn't look good." Elena didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the display, watching as the cracks continued to spread. Whatever was beneath the sphere, it wasn't staying dormant for long. And if it was as powerful as the machines that had already activated, they could be facing a far greater threat than the Etherean Empire. "We need to prepare for the worst," Elena muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. "Rios, I want all forces on high alert. If this thing starts to move, we need to be ready to evacuate the area." "Understood, Captain," Rios replied. "But what do we tell Central Command? We've already sent them data on the sphere. But if this thing is bigger than we thought..." "We tell them the truth," Elena said firmly. "The Etherians aren't the real threat here. Whatever that sphere is, it's connected to something ancient, something powerful. And it's waking up." Down in the garden, Sergeant Juno K and her team watched in stunned silence as the ground beneath the sphere continued to shift. The cracks had grown larger, and now something else was emerging from the soil. At first, it looked like more stone, another part of the ancient statues that surrounded the area. But as the object rose higher, it became clear that it was something far more complex. It was a structure, an ancient, mechanical pillar that pulsed with the same blue light as the sphere. The symbols etched into its surface were unlike anything Juno had ever seen, and as the pillar continued to rise, she felt a growing sense of unease. This wasn't just a piece of Etherian technology. This was something older, something that predated even the oldest of the galactic empires. "Sergeant," one of her soldiers whispered, his voice trembling. "What the hell is that?" "I don't know," Juno replied, her heart racing. "But whatever it is, it's not friendly." The pillar stopped rising, its base settling into the ground as the blue light around it intensified. The air around them crackled with energy, and Juno felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. This was no ordinary structure. This was a weapon, or perhaps a beacon, calling out to something far beyond the reach of human understanding. "We need to move," Juno said urgently, turning to her team. "Fall back now. We can't stay here." But before they could take a single step, the ground beneath them shook violently. A deafening roar echoed through the garden as the pillar began to emit a low, resonating hum. The energy around it intensified, and Juno's heart sank as she realized what was happening. The pillar wasn't just a structure, it was a signal, and it was broadcasting. "Command, this is Sergeant K." Juno shouted into her comms, her voice strained with panic. "The pillar is emitting some kind of signal. Strong energy readings, off the charts. I think it's calling for something. Get out of there, Sergeant." Elena's voice came through, sharp and commanding. "Fall back to the extraction point immediately." Juno didn't hesitate. "You heard the captain," she barked to her team. "Move now." The squad sprinted toward the extraction point, but as they ran, the hum from the pillar grew louder, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. The light from the sphere intensified, casting eerie shadows across the garden. And then, in the distance, Juno saw something that made her blood run cold. Far above them, in the dark void of space, a ripple appeared. At first, it was nothing more than a faint distortion, like the shimmer of light on the surface of water. But as Juno watched, the ripple grew larger, warping the stars around it. It was as if reality itself was being torn apart, and something was pushing through from the other side. "Command, we've got a situation," Juno yelled into her comms. There's something happening in orbit. A distortion or a tear, I don't know how to describe it, but it's getting bigger." Elena's voice came through immediately, her tone urgent. "We see it, Sergeant. Get your team to safety. We'll handle the rest." Juno glanced back at the pillar one last time before continuing her retreat. Whatever the signal had called for, it was coming. And if the scale of the distortion in space was any indication, it was massive. As they reached the extraction point, the ground continued to rumble beneath their feet. The distortion in orbit was now clearly visible, a swirling vortex of energy that seemed to pull at the very fabric of space. And through that vortex, something dark and massive began to emerge. "Captain, we've got a visual on the object," Rio said, his voice barely containing his shock. It's huge." Elena stared at the screen, her face pale as the shape of the object became clearer. It was a ship, but unlike any ship they had ever encountered. Its hull was black as the void, and it seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light. The vessel was massive, easily the size of a small moon, and it bristled with strange, alien technology that hummed with power. This wasn't Ethereum. This was something older, something far more dangerous. "All ships, prepare for immediate engagement," Elena ordered, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. "We're not letting that thing get any closer." The Argonaut and the rest of the human fleet moved into position, their weapons primed and ready. But as the alien ship continued to push through the vortex, Elena knew they were facing something far beyond anything they had ever encountered. "Captain, we're detecting more energy spikes," Rio shouted, his hands flying over the control console. "It's not just the ship, it's the entire area around the planet. Something's happening, and we can't get a clear reading on it." Elena's mind raced. The sphere, the pillar, the signal, it had all been a part of something much larger, something that had been buried beneath the surface of Tyros Prime for eons, waiting to be awakened. And now, it had awoken. "Get us out of here," Elena ordered, her voice calm but firm. "Fall back to safe distance. We need to regroup and figure out what the hell we're dealing with." As the fleet began to retreat, the alien ship fully emerged from the vortex, its massive form casting a shadow over the planet. And as Elena watched, she realized with a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever force they had just unleashed was far older and far more powerful than any empire in the galaxy. And humanity was right in its path. The air in the command deck of the Argonaut was thick with tension. Captain Elena Markov stood rigid, her hands clasped behind her back, as she watched the colossal alien ship drift into position above Tyros Prime. The massive, dark vessel, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, blocked out the stars, casting a shadow over the planet and the human fleet below. It radiated power, ancient, incomprehensible power. "Captain," Rios's voice was tight, almost a whisper. "The ship, it's preparing something. Energy levels are spiking. We've never seen anything like this." Elena's eyes remained fixed on the alien ship, her mind racing. Whatever this vessel was, it was older than the Etherians, older than any known civilization in the galaxy. The sphere in the garden, the machines that had activated the signal, it had all been leading to this. And now, humanity stood on the brink of a catastrophe they had unintentionally unleashed. "How long until it's fully charged?" Elena asked, her voice unnervingly calm. "At this rate, less than 10 minutes, Rios replied. "Whatever it's about to do, we won't survive it unless we act fast." "Then we need to buy time," Elena said, turning to face her crew. "Prepare the fleet for evasive maneuvers. We're not engaging that thing directly. Not yet." The fleet couldn't win a head-to-head battle with this alien ship. Elena knew that. Its sheer size, combined with the overwhelming energy readings, suggested it was equipped with technology far beyond anything humanity had developed. But they had one advantage: they were faster. If they could evade its initial strike, they might have a chance to figure out what this ship was truly capable of. "All ships, prepare to disperse," Elena ordered. "We're moving to the outer edges of the system. Keep your distance from the planet and stay mobile. We need to assess this thing before we make any rash moves." The fleet acknowledged her orders, and the Argonaut began to shift position along with the other human ships. As they pulled back, the energy levels from the alien ship continued to rise, and a strange, dark light began to pulse from its hull. "What the hell is that thing doing?" Rios muttered under his breath, staring at the tactical readouts. It's like it's charging the space around it. Space itself. Elena's brow furrowed. That didn't make sense. Even the most advanced races in the galaxy could manipulate gravity and energy fields, but manipulating the fabric of space itself was unheard of. "Captain, I'm detecting multiple distortions around the ship," one of the tactical officers said, her voice trembling. "It's like the ship is folding space. We've got tears in the fabric of reality forming all around it." Elena's mind raced. If the ship was capable of warping space itself, they were dealing with something far beyond the scope of conventional warfare. But why? What was the purpose of such a massive display of power? As the fleet continued to pull back, the distortions around the alien ship grew larger, warping the light of distant stars and twisting the space around it. And then suddenly, the ship fired. It wasn't a conventional weapon, like a laser or missile. Instead, the ship unleashed a burst of pure, raw energy, a rippling wave that distorted everything in its path. Space itself bent and twisted as the wave moved toward the human fleet, threatening to tear through anything it touched. "Brace for impact," Elena shouted. The Argonaut shook violently as the energy wave hit, but the ship held together. Around them, other human ships struggled to maintain control, their shields flaring under the strain of the distorted space. Several ships were thrown off course, spiraling out of control as their systems failed. "We can't survive another hit like that," Rios said grimly, gripping the edge of his console. "That wave didn't just damage the ships, it destabilized our position in space." Elena gritted her teeth. "Keep us moving. We need to stay out of its range until we figure out a way to counter this." But even as she spoke, the alien ship began to shift again, its massive form turning slowly toward the fleeing human fleet. It was preparing for another strike, and this time, they might not be able to avoid it. "Captain," one of communications officers said, her voice trembling, "we're picking up a signal from the surface of Tyros Prime. It's the sphere. It's reactivating." Elena's heart sank. The sphere. She had hoped that shutting it down would stop whatever was happening, but it seemed the alien ship was somehow linked to the ancient device. And now, with the ship fully operational, the sphere was waking up once again. "Give me a live feed from the surface," Elena ordered. The screen flickered, showing a shaky image of the garden where the sphere was located. The ground around it had begun to crack and shift again, just as it had before the machines activated. But this time, something far worse was happening. The air around the sphere was warping, bending the space around it in the same way the alien ship was doing in orbit. "Captain," Rio said, his voice low and filled with dread, "I think the sphere and the ship are linked. They're feeding off each other." Elena nodded slowly, her mind racing to piece it all together. The sphere, the alien ship, the distortions in space, it was all part of the same ancient technology. And if they didn't stop it, Tyros Prime, and possibly the entire system, could be destroyed. "Can we disrupt the sphere again?" she asked. Rios shook his head. "Not from orbit. We need to send another team down to the surface. But with the distortions happening around the sphere, it's going to be almost impossible to get close without being torn apart." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Then we don't send a team." Rios looked at her, confused. "What do you mean? We've still got the disruptor charges on the surface, don't we?" Elena asked, a plan already forming in her mind. "We use them to take down the Etherian shields, but they're powerful enough to destabilize the sphere again." Rios blinked, realization dawning on his face. "You want to detonate the charges remotely?" Elena nodded. "It's risky, but if we time it right, we can disrupt the sphere and break the connection to the alien ship. It's our only shot." Rios hesitated for a moment, then gave a determined nod. "I'll get the charges online, Captain." As Rios moved to prepare the disruptors, Elena turned her attention back to the alien ship. It was still moving slowly, its massive form casting a shadow over Tyros Prime. Another wave of energy was building, and this time, Elena wasn't sure if the fleet would survive. "All ships, prepare for evasive maneuvers," she ordered. "We're going to disrupt that sphere and break the connection, but we need to hold out a little longer." The fleet began to spread out, weaving through the distorted space as they tried to stay ahead of the alien ship's targeting systems. It was a desperate maneuver, but it was the only way to avoid being caught by another energy wave. "Charges are ready, Captain," Rios said, his hands moving swiftly over the control console. "Just give the word." Elena took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the live feed from the surface. The sphere was glowing brighter now, the distortions around it growing more intense. She knew that they had only one chance to get this right. "Do it," she said. Rios activated the charges, and for a moment nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, the disruptors detonated. The screen flickered as the shockwave from the explosion rocked the surface of Tyros Prime. The sphere shuddered violently, its glow flickering as the energy around it began to destabilize. "Sphere is destabilizing," Rios shouted, his voice filled with hope. "It's working." Elena allowed herself a small smile, but it was short-lived. The alien ship, now fully aware of what was happening, responded immediately. The distortions around it grew more intense, and it unleashed another wave of energy, this time directed not at the fleet, but at the planet below. "Brace for impact," Elena shouted. The wave hit the surface of Tyros Prime with unimaginable force, tearing through the atmosphere and slamming into the already fragile sphere. The live feed cut out as the sphere exploded in a burst of energy, sending shockwaves rippling through the entire system. The Argonaut shook violently, its system struggling to compensate for the sheer magnitude of the blast. Elena gripped the edge of her console, her heart racing as the ship was buffeted by the aftershocks. "Status," she shouted. "We've lost contact with the surface," Rios reported, his voice strained. "But the sphere is gone. The connection is broken." Elena exhaled slowly, relief washing over her. The sphere was destroyed, and the immediate threat to the planet had been neutralized. But as she turned her gaze back to the alien ship, her relief was short-lived. The ship hadn't stopped. "Captain," Rios said quietly, his face pale. "The ship. It's still charging." Elena's heart sank. Destroying the sphere had severed the link, but it hadn't stopped the ship. Whatever power it had been drawing from the planet was no longer necessary. It had enough energy to complete whatever horrifying task it had been sent to do. "Prepare the fleet for full retreat," Elena ordered, her voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "We can't fight this thing. Not here." The fleet began to pull back, moving away from Tyros Prime as quickly as their ships could manage. Elena watched in silence as the alien ship loomed over the planet, its dark hull pulsing with energy. The battle for Tyros Prime was over, but the war was just beginning. "Where is that ship from?" Rios asked quietly, his voice barely audible. Elena shook her head. "I don't know, but we need to find out." As the human fleet retreated into the darkness of space, Elena knew one thing for certain. Whatever ancient force they had awakened, it wasn't going to stop with Tyros Prime. This was only the beginning, and humanity would have to be ready for what came next.